and welcome to Planet Poetry. My name's Robin Houghton.
And I'm Peter Kenny. In this episode, we're talking to Roy McFarlane and hearing poems from Living by Troubled Waters, his collection from Nine Arches Press.
And Peter and I are going to be talking about the poetry of Ursula K. Le Guin and also chewing over this year's National Poetry Competition prize-winning poem by Imogen Wade. Plus, we get a bit exercised over the idea of long lists for magazines.
But before that, let's hear Robin's conversation with Roy McFarlane.
Oh, I ought to just say there is a little bit of interference towards the beginning of the interview, around 5 minutes in. I do apologise for that. Born in Birmingham, of Jamaican parentage and living in Brighton, Roy McFarlane is a poet, writer and former youth and community worker. He's currently the National Canal Laureate and a collection selector for the Poetry Book Society. And he's a former Birmingham Poet Laureate and Starbucks Poet in Residence. Roy co-edited Celebrate What? 10 Black British Poets from the Midlands, published by Smokestack. His 3 poetry collections are published by Nine Arches Press, Beginning with Your Last Breath and The Healing Next Time, which was shortlisted for the Ted Hughes Award and longlisted for the Jalak Prize. His 3rd collection, Living by Troubled Waters, was published in 2022. Roy McFarlane, welcome to Planet Poetry.
Robin, thank you so much for being a part of this Planet Poetry. I just want to know more about it.
It's really, really good to have you here. And we're focusing today on your 3rd collection?
That's correct, yes.
Living by Troubled Waters. I have to say I was put through an emotional ringer. It really gripped me. It's a sort of an eye-popping journey through, well, what it meant to be a black enslaved person in the past, what it means to be a black person today and still marginalised. And you bring in all these parallels with historical events and stories from the Bible and folklore. And at the end, I felt like there was a tsunami of passion coming over me. I'm going to come back to that word passion because that comes up later, I think, doesn't it? I'd like to quote a little bit from the back of your book. This was a testimonial from Fred Dagar, and I absolutely loved it. It says, Roy's poetry has always been about history and liturgy, outrage and melody, meditation and agitation, wrapped up in careful metrics of love. Now, who wouldn't be chuffed with that as a testimonial?
That's why I love Fred Daguerre. I'm blessed that he would say such beautiful words. I guess that is literally what I try to do in all of my works. And even though we're looking at difficult subjects, I think there's a necessity to have the conversation, to throw the pebble in the pond and see what happens. But most of all, I think love is the answer to everything. And I just think we're in a world that is very void of love at this moment in so many different scenarios. And so, yeah, I try my best in all my books to finish with love where I can.
I think that absolutely comes across. And I'm going to get you to read one of the final poems in the book when we finish. But I want to also mention, first of all, that there is this lovely introduction that you've written. Mm-hmm. It's quite an unusual thing, I think, for the poet to actually introduce the work. And I just found it was such an excellent way in from the start. And it really kind of set the scene and whetted my appetite for what was to come. And the one thing I want you to just tell us a bit about to begin with is this idea of poems of erasure and inclusion to make known. Many of us are familiar with erasure. So tell me what you mean by inclusion to make known.
Okay, I mean, it was a journey that I was having looking at the manuscript. What I was doing and what I was profoundly thinking about was erasure. I'd looked at Tom Phillips' Humament and watched how he went through a old Pulp Fiction novel, and on each page he painted and deleted the words underneath and then highlighted, or I think his expression, mined words out of that page, and it would become another poem. erasure is something that I would never have done before. But I was trying something, and then when I looked at some of the harrowing and traumatic newspaper reports, but as I was doing many of the text, some of them I could not undermine or mine words out of it. So first of all, I went to the dictionary to find out what's the opposite to erasure, and I found inclusion. And then the British Library and the Eccles Foundation, I think it was, gave me access for about 3 months to some of the materials from the 1800s and things like that. So when we photocopied or whatever, the ones I couldn't erase, I'd either rip them or write into the script kind of thing. So we'd still have the script, but it would be separated or ripped in two. And in between the rips, in between the tears, there would be an inclusion of my thoughts, my poems within the tear, within the parting, or adjacent around the script. And that's what I called inclusion, because I'm still dealing with the text, but I'm finding another way to get into the text.
As an example of a poem of inclusion, perhaps you could introduce and read for us The Passion of the Enslaved on the Body of a Negro.
To understand this poem, you have to read the coroner's report of the inquest of a slave and many slaves that died on the plantations. And this would have been in a daily newspaper that you would have got in the morning for everybody to read. Here we go. The Passion of the Enslaved on the Body of a Negro. Coroner's Report of Inquest. In St. Andrew, at Hamilton's estate, on the 19th, on the body of Betsy Bell, a Negro slave who had been confined in the stocks for a week previous to her death for obstinately refusing to do any work, without being sick or having any appearance of being so. She was taken from the stocks on the morning of the 18th and sent with the driver to the field where she refused to work and became very insolent and abusive to the bookkeeper and driver. But no punishment whatever was inflicted, as the overseer was not present. She left the field of her own accord about noon and went and lay down in the cooper's shop, and, when questioned by some people there, said her stomach hurted her. Towards evening, she was removed to the Negro houses, and appeared so ill that the overseer was sent for about 8 o'clock, who found her in cold sweats and apparently dying. He had her put into warm baths and otherwise attended to, but she expired before the morning. Dr. MacGlashow, in evidence, stated to the jury, after examining the body, that there was not any external marks of violence or symptom of anything having been taken inwardly to occasion death. And there not being any information that could lead the jury to suspect violence in any way, but from the excess of passion in herself. And I think that was the key word for me that sparked me, from the excess of passion in herself. Of excess of passion in herself, of life lived but not of your own, to suffer, to bear, to endure, of every sunrise you could not own, of every sweat, of every bloodshed, lay down in the cooper's shop,
lay down in the valley of eternal sunrise. On the body of a Negro man, William, a runaway, died by the visitation of God at the asylum. On a Negro woman, name unknown, died by the visitation of God at the asylum. On the body of a Negro woman, Sally, died by the visitation of God. God goes a-visiting, walks into an asylum, bodies of Milano, walking with those who talk to the many voices, walking with those that leave broken bodies, walking with those who drift in the husk of yesterday's breath. God goes a-visiting in the place of refuge, the place of Ceylon, where no one has the rights of seizure, in the place of sanctuary. Death goes a-visiting on the bodies of the Milano. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away.
That's such a wonderful poem, and you end on this spiritual, those who drift in the husk of yesterday's breath. What a fabulous expression.
Thank you.
And this word, the passion, you said it was this phrase that they used, but the excessive passion in herself, it's extraordinary, isn't it? Because I was thinking about that word, and we use it to mean extreme love, but of course it also means extreme rage, extreme suffering.
Absolutely.
And this coroner's report of inquest, you read out the first section, but it goes on and on. All these people that just have been died through no particular reason, just, gave up the ghost,
Gave up the ghost, and I think the term, as I've repeated, visitation of God. So forget about the trauma, forget about the body, forget about sunrise to sundown of working ungodly hours and whatever they're doing, and the beatings and everything else. They died by the visitation of God.
And as an example of a poem of erasure is To Be Free, which, again, you've taken one of these newspaper reports where the news of runaway slaves is on the front page. It's the big story. And I wondered if you might introduce that and tell us how that looks on the page, because it's really beautiful the way you've used colour as well.
I definitely did want to cross the words out. Some people will cross the words out, black the words out, but I wanted you to still see the words.
I liked that particularly. It makes it more intriguing, and yeah.
Absolutely. So you've got two things going on. So you got the poem that I've mined out of the text, but I want you to hold on to that text and look at that text. And so with that particular text, I think over one newspaper, I must have cut 3 or 4 different pages out of there,
right,
and got it to where it is, and then painted over it to represent something like green for the grass and a river that's flowing through the middle. When slaves were escaping, it was always many times by routes via the river to get away, kind of thing. So I thought that was just perfect with the title To Be Free.
Absented a short black man, native of his land, to be free. Absconded Barbadian brothers, Pompey and Antony, ceased to be given to any person to be free. Absented a woman named Philida, black, much marked, belonged to the river to be free.
It's very clever the way you've picked these words out, and I love that you've made something completely new from it. I know that's the purpose of erasure, but
yeah, and I guess the journey again in everything that I've written, from the healing next time to this one, is to try to find the humanity. Even when we look at today, we dehumanize those that are the victims and the oppressed, and for us to continue the oppression and to continue the murders, to continue what we do, the slaughter, we dehumanize them, say that they're not like us. And if they haven't got that humanity, we have the excuse to do whatever we want to them. And I guess within that writing, I'm forever trying to show you the humanity of these individuals. So even when that line where it says Barbadian men, brothers, etc., etc., I just took the men out and just says Barbadian brothers.
This motif of running, actual and metaphorical, occurs through the book, doesn't it? Running from captivity, or fleeing a war-torn home country, or having to run at night. This is leading me to one of the poems with the name of the title of the book. You've got actually 4, haven't you? Living by Troubled Waters.
Yeah.
And in number 4, we hear of a child, learning how to run and why it's important to be able to run. And I wondered if you might read that one for us, please.
Okay. The series of poems called Living by Troubled Waters kind of has that notion of the metaphor of the water being troubled, being stirred, and it just feels that in the Caribbean Sea, with the waters around the Caribbean, whether it be this island with waters around it, or whether we are by rivers, there's this constant trouble. Wherever we move, there's this constant trouble. So this is actually a reflection of me growing up in the Black Country, where my dad moved to, a place just outside Wolverhampton, for those, Bilston. And there's this beautiful, massive field. This was in the 70s and the 80s at the back, where you take shortcuts and had adventures. It was just amazing as a 8-year-old to 12-year-old on weekends with your mates. Summertime especially, we had the greatest adventures. And I just wanted to write about this. Living by Troubled Waters, Part 4. A stone throw away from the fields, across an avenue behind houses at the end of the lane, where the grass was wilder, the terrain more rugged, and tracks were known only to the adventurous. To where a Black family owned a detached house. A mother who was sweet as the greater cake she gave me, and rough as its texture on sad days when her husband worked long shifts. A son named Danny, who taught me to run on the ball of my feet and never flat-footed. And a daughter they had named Tina, older than me, who smiled, leaving me enchanted. These are the tracks that led us to waters where we were botanists in the springtime, making sense of wiggling exclamations. Tadpoles inquisitive as us in their world, as in the palm of our hands. Jumping from rock to rock, we who would dare to leap across the rapids, and after we would crawl through the reeds, hide in the bank, and throw dirt bombs on enemies advancing. Enemies we shared sweets with, dipping lollipops and licorice into sherbet-colored evenings. These are the waters that cut through wild lands that bordered homes. The GKN works and the football field. These are the shortcuts for running to school or picking up partners. These are the walks with Tina, 2 years older, who still followed you into wet dreams. This is the story of the man who carried the whole world in a shopping trolley, who disappeared after we found his trolley in the river. This is the evening I finished school late and had to take the shortcut in the dark before Dad got home, realizing nigger thrown at you from an older group of school kids made you remember how to run on the pads of your feet, ran a mile without stopping and never looking back. These are the waters we got lost in the making of our youth.
Thank you. It's a real song of innocence and experience, isn't it? The way it turns on that moment with the man with the shopping trolley who disappears. Suddenly it's not all about tadpoles and the real world kind of intrudes somehow. Tell me a bit about what were the great influences, and at what age did you start feeling, poetry was going to be your thing?
I know, that's really a good question. I always think, being a son of a minister, my father was a deacon. I think, especially my mum, because my dad was illiterate. He struggled with his reading and his writing. So everything we did in the house was mum. Mum read for us, mum, as I was growing up. Mum, I didn't grow up on nursery rhymes. I grew up on the Psalms. That's what my mum would put me to bed every night with the Psalms.
It's a good grounding. I'm a fan.
Even that lyrical, beautiful sound of the King James Version it still rings in me, even though I don't go to church anymore. It still rings in me. It's still part of who I am and how I perform and what I do. So I think that's my beginnings. As a teenager, I started to play around with love poems, of course, the first thing you do, and bouncing off George Benson. I think when I was in my 30s, I was doing a lot of youth and community work, and I was working with marginalized groups, and especially black young men who were either being excluded from schools or might be on the borders or the edge of joining gangs. And so we had conversations with them, and they loved their hip hop, Biggie, Tupac, etc., etc. And we had to find a way to have a conversation with them. And so we looked at the lyrics and really highlighted the misogynism, the violence, and etc. And we said, listen, what's your reality? What's your stories? Living in Smedic rather than in LA, California. And so we would use poetry. And that's when I started to write poetry.
Right.
Me and a friend, we shared the poetry with the young men. They would start to write their poems. And there's always a catch or a caveat. Because writing the poetry was a bit tough for them, right? It was like, we got the beat, man, sir. We got the beat in our head, man. Just let us free. No, I want to see how it's written. I want the clarity. I want you to be clear before you get into the studio. I will take you to the studio. You will do your thing and carry away. I don't mind, but I want to see the words.
That's really interesting, and that sort of brings up the crossroads between performance or performance poetry or rap and the written word or the so-called page poetry. That kind of little kind of tension that's always going on, I feel, in the poetry world.
Absolutely. And I think just to give acknowledgement to Roy McFarlane, who was a Birmingham Poet Laureate in the 2002, probably to 2005. And he was the famous Trinidadian poet that was living in Birmingham that you'd always see have a djembe drum with him. Wherever he went, he would have this drum. And he took me under his wings. The first time I met him was for a conference around equalities and racism. And we would bring in poets and artists to break the day up when we had academics and statistics being thrown at people left, right, and centre. We'd bring a poet or an artist in, and Roy McFarlane was that poet. And from then I had that conversation with him, showed him my poems, took me under his wings for about 6 months. And this is a true story. 6 months into having a conversation with him, he says, I really love your poems. Bring 3 of your best poems I'm doing a performance at the Crescent Theatre. So bring your 3 best poems with you, man. Says, okay. I turn up. He does his performance. 10 minutes before the break, he says, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce you to a new up-and-coming poet. Roy McFarlane, can you come to the stage?
Oh, no, you didn't know you were going to be called on.
Honestly, Robbie, I didn't know. Pure sweat and trembling and everything. But because he emphasized, bring your best poems, I thought, yes.
But if you'd known you were going to perform, you might have been a bit like, oh, it might not have happened. Well, I got a great story, though. Now, in the book, there is this sequence, the visitation of the spirits, and you explain in the notes that these are derived from stories your mother told you, and also exploring the line between spirituality and you say what others might see as mental illness, and we've had hints of that in some of the other poems. And spirituality, you say you grew up with that sense of spirituality as well, and I just think it's a beautiful sequence. You might want to say something about that, and I'd like you to read maybe a couple of the poems in that sequence for us.
It's a big subject. And like you say, we're looking at the enslaved and how they were treated, and it's often looking for a space by troubled waters, a sanctuary or a clearing or just something to find survival. So when we run or whilst we're in a danger, we need to survive. And that survival could be in a space that is created. That survival could be in the art that we have, or the stories that we tell each other. And it just made me think of my mother. Even when I look at the British society, there are those places where spirituality goes all the
The
way back,
folklore and the kind of the legends and the kind of that
and the
sort of
legends. Exactly. All that stuff there underline who we are. And so my mom, when I was growing up, would always be telling me stories. And what I loved about her stories was that there were never any dates, but there was always a connection to a disaster, an
oh,
earthquake, a hurricane, or something. There was always a disaster. And funny thing, when I started, my mom had passed away, but I could remember these stories. And I was starting to put these stories together. And again, it's about me just holding on to the legacy
yeah.
of my mother. So naturally, when I had the chance at the Echo Center, I looked at some of these stories that my mom told me. And lo and behold, they existed. Absolutely amazing. I mean, some of the stories might be over elaborated, and so I've collected a series of half a dozen of these stories that my mom told me. That again, as you said, that the book begins with the idea of enslavement to the present day, and I'm trying to say nothing. I'm not saying that nothing hasn't changed, but unless we talk and there are, a response to what has happened over the hundreds of years. We are continuously going to act and behave in certain ways to certain groups that will never
Yeah,
change.
which goes back to your idea of inclusion to be known. Let's bring these stories out. Let's look at these newspapers and see the horror of what really did happen and face up to it, I guess.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
maybe you would read for us New Cross Hospital, 2013.
New Cross Hospital, 2013, a scan report on the lungs. During those moments when the house stretched and sighed, Mom would say, "I see you, and God see you, old Beelzebub," and rebuked him in unknown tongues. She always talked at the devil in the neat folds of the house, on the wings of disasters, and proclaiming, "God is good." I saw no reason to question her daily conversations with conspirators, spirits, and bugs in the corner of rooms. I was always safe in her world and loved in this world. It's only now, after the visitation of friends, sleepless nights, her third bout of cancer, I intervene and apologize as she tells the doctors, "I know what you're doing, and the Lord see and know all that is done in the dark."
Oh,
That's absolutely a reality, that last bit.
that is a lovely testament to your mother. And I see my mum in that as well. You end up, she says something like that and you're thinking, oh no.
Oh my God. I said to the doctor, "I'm sorry, but we're leaving now."
Oh gosh. And I thought that was beautiful. Let's just talk a bit about, you grew up in Wolverhampton. That is in the Black Country, isn't it? It's funny because we had Liz Berry on the podcast a while ago, and we were talking about what is the geographical definition of the Black Country. So I just checked. I went onto Google Maps and I just checked Wolverhampton. I'm thinking, I'm terrible, aren't I? Southerner. I know it's near Birmingham.
In between Wolverhampton and Birmingham. And I'm only looking from a north and south. I'm not even looking from an east to west, which could be Walsall to Hales Owen. I've never got my head around east to west, but north to south, I'm very clear
Yeah.
about.
and I came across the statistic that Birmingham has more canals than either Venice or Amsterdam, which I thought, wow, that's some kind of a stat. So then you're the canal laureate. Did you sort of take on that role and think, yeah, this is absolutely my thing?
Well, first of all, I was quite surprised I got the phone call. Would you like to be canal laureate? Because I know Joe Bell well. Joe Bell is just an amazing poet. And on top of that, she talked to me about on being on the boat. And she has a boat. And so, well, first thing I said, you do realise I haven't got a boat.
You thought that was perhaps a requirement.
You know what I mean? And he says, no. We're just wondering if you could do something with it. And then straight away I just thought, well, listen, these are the canals I used to jump and run around.
You see a part of a city that you would never see otherwise, don't you? And it's so peaceful, like in London, the Regent's Canal. And you've done a film poem, haven't you, that I watched that through the Regent's Canal. Right. And it's marvellous. Anyone who lives in a city, I think, you find out so much about its heritage when you start exploring its canal network.
Absolutely.
Has it taken you to other cities across the country?
Oh yeah, it's been a joy. I mean, that's the best part of it. Whether I'm being called out for commissions or festivals, or just to have talks or perform. I mean, all the way down to Pontypridd, then up north. I mean, I've done Burnley, I've done Leeds, I've gone to the other side where I've done Ellesmere. But there's this place that I've just been in January, celebrating their new collection that they wrote by the canals. I think it was Littleborough. And all their poems were inspired by Rochdale Canal. And it's the most amazing stuff that they wrote.
Just to bring you back to Living by Troubled Waters, there is a poem in 3 parts, and I wondered if you might read that for us. You Are Impossible to Love, Part 1.
You get an aspect of me as an individual. I was adopted. And I think I had in my mind, everybody's read my book, I'm adopted. And I just thought, is it clear? So there's one aspect is from my perspective, and the other aspect is from the collective, the Windrush collective, as it were. You Are Impossible to Love. Paulette Winston, Kenneth Williams, Junior Green, Julia Griffith, Windrush generation. Geoffrey Miller, Winston Jones, Dexter, Bristol, Windrush generation. Valerie Baker, Richard Stewart. You are the child of Windrush, sweet and bitters. You are the unwanted truth within the pleats of your mother's summer dress. You are love and lust in the time of the big freeze. You are the seasons changing. You are the tears cried through the inquisition of, tell me the name of his father. You are the growing burden, the choice to be made. You are the unwanted, the invisible. You are the visible, wanted. You are another mother's love, the love of her mother and the love of many mothers. You are her story, the visitation of the spirits, discernments and the psalms of pilgrims with grips filled with filigrees of God and a one-way ticket. You are Windrush, the wanted in times of trouble, the visible that becomes invisible, to be discarded by a nation. You are the unwanted. You are the hunted down in the middle of the night. You are the imprisoned. You are the boarded flight to a place you have never known. You are the British citizens. Yes, you are a British citizen whose birthright has been taken twice over. You are the papers and documents lost overnight. You are the one who helped to build this house after the walls came tumbling down. You are the one living by troubled waters. You are the one with no songs of Zion under a weeping willow tree. Glenda Caesar, Anthony Bryan, Windrush generation. Renford McIntyre, Leighton Joseph Robinson, Michael Braithwaite, Windrush generation. Herbert Howard, Sarah O'Connor, Elwaldo Romea, Whitfield Francis, Windrush generation.
When I was reading this, I was thinking of Barbara Walker's Turner Prize piece,
Absolutely.
where she drew on the walls these wonderful portraits of people, and they're superimposed over all these letters, all these forms they had to fill out to prove that they had been here all this time, and to prove all the kind of work that they'd done, and unbelievable.
It's a travesty. I mean, my mum would literally tell you, I was invited over here. Constantly will tell you. And I've got my British passport. And it's one of the things I've kept of hers.
So you were adopted, so your stepfather, I suppose, brought you up.
Yeah, I'd like to call him my life father.
Well, one or two poems where you talk about your relationship with him, and it's beautiful. And I was wondering if you would read one of these, Praise for My Father.
Oh.
I welled up a bit when I read that one.
And it means so much to me that emotionally, I mean, when I read, I cry sometimes. So I'm going to really try my best not to cry while I'm reading this, yeah? You know, my father was a man of God. He loved God. And he did so much for the community, the church community. I think being the only child and my mum pouring her love on me, there was friction between my dad, especially when I got into a young man. Maybe being selfish, wanting more of my father, and the church was getting all of him, kind of thing. He deserves this and much more, and I love him. Praise for my father. Birds flying high, sun in the sky. Nina Simone, feeling good. In praise of Ishmael Zechariah, my father with the names of prophets. In praise of pockets full of bounty when you came back from work. In praise of the coconuts you held with a slight bend in the arm. The way your machete kissed the shell and it opened. The way we leaned our heads back and drank. In praise of the moon and North Star, you navigated for seasons of growing and finding our way back home. In praise of the spirit of the Maroons from St. Thomas, Jamaica, always looking for a way back to Africa. In praise of almanacs you read religiously with the help of Mother. In praise of razor blades and the splash of Old Spice on your face. In praise of the big old Bible that propped the family up. In praise of accordions and mouth organs you played, singing, "This world is not my home, I'm only passing through. If heaven was not my home, dear Lord, what would I do?" In praise of a higher being, but I won't give him blue eyes. In praise of wrestling, Big Daddy, and giant haystacks. In praise of the day I was taller than you, wrestled you, found myself on my back, knee in my solar plexus, and a warning, so you think you is man. In praise of Johnny cakes, fried dumplings the size of flying saucers, taking us out of this world full of butter, golden as the sun. In praise of those times you pulled me back from the sun. In praise of butterflies all having fun, you know what I mean. Sleep in peace when day's done, that's what I mean. In praise of bounty, bookshelves filled with encyclopedias, a volume for every week. In praise of the mothership of your dreams, a universe of words, safe havens and clearings. In praise of the average life we lived so others could have a beginning. In praise of open doors for every tongue to enter. In praise of the mantra to serve others. In praise of your vision for making a better life for a fatherless child. In praise of love, you smothered my mother with like butter on hot Johnny cakes. In praise of the words I'm sending you across the galaxy, words of love. In praise of that better place you're in praise of rivers running free, in praise of freedom, in praise of feeling good. You know what I mean? Yeah, you know what I
Lovely.
mean.
Thank you so much for reading that. It's just such a beautiful picture of your relationship with him. Is there anything you're working on now that you want to share with us, or what's on the horizon?
I'm working on a nonfiction, looking at idea of poetry and myself as a poet. And secondly, I'm working on another collection, which hopefully will be coming out in a couple of years.
Perfect.
So yeah.
Look forward to that. I just want to say thanks so much, Roy, for coming on to Planet Poetry, talking about your book, and it is a true passion that comes through, and it's very spine-tingling, so I really enjoyed this book. Thank you.
Well, I love your words, tsunami of passion. We're going to get a postcard. I'm just going to, I don't know, we're going to have a banner. And we're taking that banner with us. Tsunami of passion. And we'll have your name there somewhere.
Thank you so much. That's great. Brilliant.
Thank you, Robin. You've been awesome.
I love Roy McFarlane's interview with you. He comes across as so warm and likeable and kind of grounded.
Oh, absolutely.
And his poetry really reaches into interesting places. We have the advantage of seeing some of these poems on the page. For example, The Passion of the Enslaved on the Body of a Negro. Down the centre is a central column of the coroner's report of inquests. And then kind of either side, it's sort of three columns. Column 1 and 3 are Roy's poem about it. And it just looks really visually striking apart from anything else. And it is that his language echoes the kind of language that's in there, but takes it to another level. And it's very deft and interesting. I'm not usually very big on this kind of intertextuality, but that works really well for me. A list of people that dying by this visitation of God, which is basically, one can only imagine what happened, what sort of neglect or abuse was visited on them.
And this is the kind of what Roy was talking about, the idea of inclusion to be known. So putting in his own ideas, almost the between the lines stuff. And as you say, it's just got this visually and rhythmically, and the fact that it echoes or almost parodies the language of the official report, I think is very strong. I found that very striking.
Yeah. But I liked, again, I don't particularly like Eurasia poems. I think
the poem that he read, To Be Free, described how it looks on the page. It's got colour. Yes. He's got this almost like a sort of abstract image of a river running through it. And I really like this kind of montage effect. He uses that technique on a few poems. And and being able to see the original text, as he pointed out, I think quite often with Erasure, you can't really see the rest of the text. It's been completely blacked out. But I think it's important to be able to see the original text to understand what's been done to it and why. Definitely.
And that's what I was going to go on to say, really, was the fact that you could see the original text rather than just those kind of black redacted lines that you see so often, actually make this, to me, much more interesting. And with that sort of image of the river, it's a thing of beauty to look at and has the message in there. But when he just gets away into, not referring to other texts so directly, like in the Living by Troubled Waters, the one he read, the number 4 of that sequence. I just absolutely love that. And I think you pulled out this idea of it shows an innocent world that then kind of becomes, there's a sense of experience and, the racism and being chased at the end and so on.
Yes. This is one of the things that really gripped me about the book, the fact that Roy has woven in his own experience of growing up in the Midlands and becoming a young man and all of those things. And yet at the same time, right next to that, those personal stories about him and his family are these references back to other people years ago and what they went through. And there are these biblical references all the way through, which really roots it in a kind of I don't know, it gives it a I can't say gravitas, but there's something about it that takes it away from just the personal story. This is a personal story in centuries of personal stories, and it really touched me. I found it very moving.
Yeah, I love those echoes of the King James Bible.
Yeah.
These kind of lines, which I think you like too. We were botanists in the springtime, making sense of wiggling exclamations, tadpoles inquisitive as us in their world. But I just love that image of the tadpoles, that is a kind of, something that's undeveloped, that's going to change into something else, and it's so right in the space of being near this water and being a kid and running around doing stuff. But having that tadpole in your hand that is going to change into something else, and you do get that kind of foreshadowing. It just seems so real, and that deep roots of the language into King James's Bible. I don't know, it's a crass comparison, but, I love Bob Marley. I've always loved Bob Marley. When I was at school in London, when I was about 13, I was lent lots of Bob Marley albums by somebody in my class. But, I came to realise that what was so kind of wonderful about Marley's lyrics, a lot of it was that it sounds like some kind of lost prophet from, the Bible somehow. There's something really sort of just thunderously kind of prophetic about it. It's very rare that I listen to one of our interviews, an interview that you've done, and I found myself in tears at the end of it. And his poem about praise for my father, I love that. I can't tell you how much I love that poem. And I think it's, the fact that he was adopted and the fact that the father, when you're in that situation, I mean, I had a stepfather that I didn't particularly get on with, but there's a choice in that. It's not an automatically love thing or kind of bond. And the fact that they had such a bond, I had the opposite. But the fact that there was this bond, I just found incredibly moving, and it's sort of that sense of, loving somebody warts and all. And I don't know, whatever this alchemy that Roy McFarlane's done is it just had me broken at the end of it. So
yeah. As I said at the beginning of the interview, I really felt I was very moved by it. I felt I'd been put through the ringer of emotions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everything you read, that you are impossible to love, this idea of being adopted and being of that kind of generation, the Windrush generation that's had so much horribleness to put up with in one way or another, And it's such a loving poem, just a very healing book in a way. And that poem about his mum as well.
Yes, that whole section was lovely. The stories that his mother used to tell, and the fact that he found out later that quite a lot of them were based on fact, but he just thought of them as, they're just mum's stories,
The mum saying, the Lord sees and knows all that is done in the dark to the doctors, it's kind of...
It's lovely. There's some lovely tributes to his parents, and I think he's done a great job in this book.
Yeah, just great.
Living by Troubled Waters, published by Nine Arches, Roy McFarlane.
What have you been reading, Peter? You're going to share something with us?
Yeah, well, my long-standing love affair with American poetry.
Oh, yeah.
But in the last episode, we touched briefly on Ursula K. Le Guin, whose novels we both really admire, I think.
Yeah.
Particularly the Left Hand of Darkness, which was examining androgyny in science fiction.
That was so amazing, wasn't it? And the reason I read that was somebody brought it to a book group that I was a member of and suggested we read it. And I was just blown away. I'd never read anything like it. It was so moving and, emotionally and intellectually challenging and interesting. And I don't know, I loved it.
Yeah. On this planet of, I'm reading now, planet of Gethin, whose inhabitants are ambisexual humans with no fixed gender identity who adopt female or male sexual characteristics for brief periods of their sexual cycle. And which sex they adopt can depend on context and relationships. But yeah, I mean, when I read that it just blew me away. It was just such a different take. It turns out her parents were anthropologists, and she was born in Berkeley in California, where, curiously, my brother was at university at Berkeley. But so I visited there. They hung out with the last member of a Yahi tribe in California, with this person called Ishi. And her mother wrote books about Ishi because he was the last person of that blood. So it's quite interesting how a fiction there's a lot of that almost anthropological approach to it.
Yes, very much.
But it made me I pull off my shelves a book I've had for years called The Language of the Night, which is essays on fantasy and science fiction. There was an essay at the end about talking about writing, and she comes across as a very funny person, I think. And this is a speech. I'm not going to read it all, but basically, in a nutshell, her advice seems to boil down to learn to type and do lots of writing.
Right, good. That sounds good.
And then she talks about following rules. Put it this way. If you feel you need rules and want rules, and you find a rule that appeals to you or that works for you, then follow it. Use it. But if it doesn't appeal to you or doesn't work for you, then ignore it. In fact, if you want to and are able to, kick it in the teeth, break it, fold, staple, mutilate and destroy it. See, the thing is, as a writer, you are free. You are about the freest person that ever was. Your freedom is what you have brought with your solitude, your loneliness. You are in the country where you make up the rules, the laws. You are both dictator and obedient populace. It is a country nobody has ever explored before. It's up to you to make the maps, to build the cities. Nobody else in the world can do it, or ever could do it, or ever will be able to do it again. Absolute freedom is absolute responsibility. The writer's job, as I see it, is to tell the truth. The writer's truth, nobody else's. But I just love that kind of, being a writer is a freedom. I really liked it. It kind of made me think, yeah, of course. And it's lovely to be reminded of the fact that why writing is so interesting. It's because with your solitude and so on, you can actually build a world, even if it's in a 4-line poem, you can build an entire world.
Yeah.
And the idea that, the thing that makes that freedom kind of really valuable is telling the truth in it, your truth, and that uniqueness of your own truth is the thing that you can deliver as a writer.
I do like that, although, of course, these days that's, if you're talking about your truth as a writer, then absolutely, and I'm sure that's the context in which she wrote that. Whereas these days, as soon as you start saying, I've got my truth, you've got your truth, and people take it literally, and then it all becomes a little bit tricky.
Yeah. Well, my truth is the world is flat. Yeah.
Well, exactly.
Ursula died in 2018. And this thing about the sense of humour, right? I like the fact that her last collection, which was published the year after she died, was called So Far, So Good. I really enjoyed that. So, the Poetry Foundation website, there was some of her poems on there. She published 11 books of poetry in her life, which I was quite surprised at.
Yes.
As well as all the novels and stage plays and
lots of
essays
stuff.
And children's books and so on. A quick poem of hers.
Oh, yes.
It's called Leaves, and there's a word in it, Kishamish, which apparently is a ranch where the family used as a getaway in the hills of the Napa Valley in California. Leaves. Years do odd things to identity. What does it mean to say, I am that child in the photograph at Kishamish in 1935? Might as well say, I am the shadow of a leaf of the acacia tree felled 70 years ago, moving on the page the child breathes. Might as well say, I am the words she read, or the words I wrote in other years, flicker of shade and sunlight, as the wind moves through the leaves.
I love that idea of looking back, at a photo or something, but the shadow, the light and the dark, it makes you sort of feel how transitory and inconsequential our lives are.
Yeah. It's a bit like Keats's grave, isn't it? Here lies one whose name was writ on water.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So, yeah, Ursula K. Le Guin.
A legend. Well, I've just been looking through the National Poetry Competition prize-winning poems, because, of course, the result was out a couple of weeks ago, wasn't it? So this nice booklet that the Poetry Society print up and send out with poetry review. So we've got all the prize-winning poems. Interesting. I mean, I haven't listened to any of the chatter on the socials about the prize-winning poems, but there's always a fair bit of naysaying and moaning, isn't there? I mean, which isn't surprising. It's a big competition. How many entries were there this year?
Oh, it's
I wrote
dozens
this down
of thousands,
somewhere.
isn't it?
18,000 or some crazy number. I rather liked this first prize-winning poem. When I first read it, I did think, ooh, this is a bit sort of prosy and...
The time I was mugged in New York City.
Yes.
I did see some chatter online and about it. Some people bemoaning its prosaic nature and so on.
I think if you just read it the once, I can see that might have been the impact. Shall I read it and then we can talk about it? Because if people haven't read it...
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, it's by Imogen Wade. The Time I Was Mugged in New York City. I told people that the travel sickness pills made me stupid. I entered JFK with a red suitcase and no one to greet me. A man came up to me, dressed in black. I found myself in a car park by an expensive van, and he was holding my luggage. Get in, he said. There wasn't a single thought in my head. I found myself inside his van. He locked the doors immediately after, made me switch my phone off as we went under the bridge. We spoke about Niagara Falls. He chose the narrowest roads in the city, a needle making a joke out of Manhattan. When he pulled up outside Grand Central Station, he said, "Don't get out. There are bad people around." He made me unzip my suitcase, books and bras spilling over the seat, and give him all my money. Then he helped me out of the van, like I was a princess. He held my bags like a vassal and kissed my cheek. Get in, I hear, whenever a man pushes me too far. Get in to my big black car. Sometimes in my dreams, I am sitting beside him on the leather. I don't need to be ordered and together. We drive with melodious speed over the East River. I got halfway down and the bit about he chose the narrowest roads, a needle making a joke out of Manhattan. That's the first time I thought, oh, what's going on here? And then there's this account of him stealing all her money, and it just sounds so bizarre the way it's phrased. You know, she unzipped her case and then he stole her money and then he helped her out like a princess. And so there's this very strange relationship between these two people, and even in the ending she's imagining something melodious, a melodious trip with this guy.
Yeah.
This kind of ambivalent feeling about this, and perhaps and other relationships, no doubt. I don't know. What did you think?
It's very dreamlike, isn't it? And it has that short sentences type in prose. You know, the idea of writing short sentences, increases anxiety and pace and so on. And because when you are feeling anxious, you can only think in little clips of thought.
Yes.
What it does remind me of is I had a very good friend who unfortunately died in the 90s, Timothy Gallagher, who wrote these amazing dramatic monologues. And it was only after I knew him, after some time, he told me that he had HIV. And a lot of these mysterious monologues he wrote were actually alluding to his secret. That kind of sense of dramatic monologue about something very disturbing,
Yeah.
written in quite a sort of flat way,
Yes.
really builds up the emotion. And I can see this working really well as a dramatic monologue,
Right.
spoken and so on.
The revisiting of a bad experience in the memory. You were saying about how your friend, there's something that wasn't being said, but something that was eating at his thinking.
Yeah, and leaking out in his writing.
Yeah, yeah.
I do like this. There's a psychological complexity to it and ambivalence and so on that make it really interesting. And, there are symbols in there, and there are, we spoke about Niagara Falls,
Yeah, yes.
that sense of something like a big fall or something weird about to happen, and what you were saying about rereading it, the more you revisit it, the more kind of resonances there are.
Which is a pretty good sign, and I really enjoyed it. I did also enjoy the second prize-winning poem, which happens to be an actual prose poem.
Yeah.
So it's a big up this year for the prose poems / prose poems. So well done, Imogen Wade.
And also, a poem that's literally got people talking as well.
Indeed. What do we think about long listing and short listing, Peter, in terms of, I don't mean for competitions, I mean for magazines, when you send your poems to a magazine and then for that issue they say, oh, we had a really big long list and you made it onto the long list, hurrah! And then 3 weeks later, you made it onto the short list, hurrah! And then 2 weeks later, oh, sorry, we didn't want it after all. Some magazines do it, but most don't. But what's it all about?
Yeah, I could give you an informed answer to that question, but what I'll do is make you wait for several weeks while letting you know I'm thinking about the answer to give. Now, I find it, I can sort of see why people do it. It gives you an idea of where you are and if your work is kind of there or thereabouts. But I find it slightly annoying and sometimes on the edge of insulting. I don't know why.
Before this became a thing a few years ago, I've had things like an email saying, your work wasn't for us for this issue, but it was on a short list, but it didn't make it, or something like that. If they want to say there was a short list
we
or a long
almost
list.
took it.
Yeah, something like that. It's just quicker and easier, and it doesn't drag it out. And as you say, it's not demeaning. Sometimes it feels a bit patronising. Personally, I find that anyway. We can't be the only ones who feel that way.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to be fair about it.
But on the positive side, I have seen people say they're really pleased to hear that their work was long listed.
Definitely,
it's very positive. It feels like a boost. But
well, you see people on social media saying I've been long listed for such and such a publication.
Yeah.
And maybe that's part of the cunning of it. That it builds up anticipation and people talk about the possibility of being published by such and such a magazine.
Yeah. So do we think it's something that's come in for the social media, basically, the fact that people will talk about it?
Yeah, I guess they've got to generate word of mouth, and that's probably a good way of doing it. So I'm in danger of, although disliking it, kind of beginning to see the reason for it, having talked about it. But
well, that's it. I can sort of see lots of reasons for it. But then again, I feel as if it can contribute to the general anxiety that people feel around rejections. It's like taking a long time to pull off the plaster.
Yeah.
When actually, wouldn't it be better for our mental health if we weren't drumming our fingers for weeks thinking, oh, maybe I've made it, and then finding, oh, no, I haven't. How about just a quick thanks, but not this time? A lot of editors do that, don't they? I'm just interested at these different approaches.
It's such a phenomenally difficult job anyway, and having to sort of balance everything.
Absolutely.
There is this thing about, each magazine being a collection, and this idea of, the poems all having to work with each other. Mm-hmm. It sort of did occur to me recently that, if you're writing things that are unusual or slightly different tone of voice to the predominant trend at the moment. That's going to, the idea of fitting in with all those other things. Sometimes I wonder that if you have an original tone of voice, say, that it's harder to have that accommodated when people are trying to produce coherent collections. I suppose that's part of the skill of editing, is to be able to balance those kind of dissonant notes with the others. But
well, yes, but also I think before you send poems to magazines, you usually will read a copy of the magazine. You'll get a sense of what's in there or who the editor is. And I think if one does a bit of research, then I think there's a place for all kinds of styles of poems, but it's finding where that place is, isn't it? But anyway, that's all. I was just sort of wondering. It must actually give more work to the editors as well. They've got to send out a whole load of communications, 3 times.
It also demonstrates their dedication to the process, I suppose. I don't know, there is a sense of grandiosity about this magazine is so fabulous that just it's like some national campaign where it has a long list and a short list and all the rest of it. I just can't bear all the list thing. I think it's just a fundamental problem with my approach to the world, really, is that this idea of constant competition. I'm
with you, though, and that's why I feel it must make the whole thing more anxious for many people. And the competition is tough, so can we not make it tougher for people to be rejected? That's my view.
There's no writer that hasn't been rejected, so...
Absolutely.
We always, rejection is part of the game. It's like acting, you're going to get knocked back, even if you're a big star.
There's that website, isn't there, of famous literary rejections, and that's always worth a visit.
Yeah.